Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the first lecture of the 2000 Lou Douglas Lecture Series. Our speaker tonight is Father Roy Bourgeois, the founder of the School of the Americas Watch. This evening's lecture is being co-sponsored by Manhattan Alliance for Peace and Justice. MAPJ's board member, Ann Cowan, has been instrumental in helping bring Father Roy to Manhattan. And also, several local churches have contributed to tonight's presentation, including the College Avenue United Methodist Church, the First Congregational Church, the Manhattan Mennonite Church, Seven Dolors Catholic Church, and the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Manhattan. For 20 years, the Lou Douglas Lecture Series has honored the memory of distinguished Professor of Political Science Lou Douglas by hosting speakers known for both their intellect and commitment to the ideals that Lou Douglas worked for all his life: social justice, human rights, international development. With support from Mary Douglas and the University for Mankind, and the contributions of time and money from students, faculty, administrators, academic departments, private donors, the series has made a significant contribution to the political debate within our community and on this campus. One of the unique features of the Lou Douglas Lecture Series is the involvement of students as interns. These interns work with the coordinator in handling all the logistics of putting together one of these lectures. And this year we have another fine group of interns, and I just want to take a moment to recognize them and in their majors. This year's interns are Amanda Finger, Political Science; John Franson, Mass Communications. He's on the stage and he'll be introducing Father Roy in just a minute. Judd Herbster, Political Science and Pre-Law. Kimberly Pride, Economics. Lindsay Schwartz, Social Sciences and Women's Studies. Jonas Stewart, Political Science. And Amy Walker, Architectural Engineering. Father's Roy lecture will be followed by a brief question and answer period, and I encourage you to stay for that presentation. Following the lecture, I've been asked to make this announcement that everyone here is invited to Chris Renner's house for a reception for Father Roy. That's 805 Valley Drive. 805 Valley Drive. Is Chris here? Chris, I hope you have a big house, because if most of these people come, that's going to be quite a reception. Okay? Okay, I'll turn things over now to John Franson, who will introduce Father Roy. Thank you.
I'm proud to be introducing tonight's speaker, Father Roy Bourgeois. Bourgeois served as a naval officer for 4 years and is a recipient of the Purple Heart. After military service, he entered the seminary of Maryknoll Missionary Order and was ordained a Catholic priest in 1972. Bourgeois worked with the poor of Bolivia for 5 years until he was arrested and forced to leave the country because of his defense of the poor. In 1980, he became involved in El Salvador after 4 U.S. churchwomen were raped and killed by Salvadoran soldiers. 2 of the nuns were his friends. Bourgeois became an outspoken critic of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America. Since then, he has served 7 sentences totaling 4 years in U.S. federal prisons for nonviolent protests against the U.S. Army School of Americas, or SOA, at Fort Benning, Georgia. Each year, the U.S. taxpayer-funded SOA trains hundreds of Latin American soldiers in combat skills. In 1990, Bourgeois founded the School of America's Watch. Located just outside the main entrance of Fort Benning and with an office in Washington, D.C., SOA Watch researches the SOA and informs the general public, Congress, and the media about the implications of the SOA on the poor of Latin America. In 1995, Bourgeois received an Academy Award nomination for his work on a documentary film about the SOA called School of Assassins. He also received the 1997 Pax Christi USA Teacher of Peace Award. In September 1998, he was released from federal prison after serving a 6-month sentence for protesting the SOA. That November, he joined thousands at the main gate of Fort Benning to call for the SOA's closure. This November, Bourgeois will once again join thousands of demonstrators at Fort Benning. If Bourgeois' critics and supporters can agree on one thing, it's this: Roy Bourgeois is persistent. Now, please join me in welcoming Father Roy Bourgeois.
Thank you, John. Thank you for being here this evening. It's a blessing to be at your university, and I want to thank all of the co-sponsoring groups. We're going to talk tonight about a serious issue. The U.S. Army School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. Serious because it's about suffering and death of our brothers and sisters in Latin America. It's about a school on U.S. soil at a big Army post, Fort Benning, Georgia, that every year trains about 1,500 soldiers in combat skills, in commando operations, psychological warfare, counterinsurgency techniques. And many of these soldiers have returned to their home countries and have been very involved in the suffering and death there, the oppression of their people. The starting point is not the School of the Americas, it's Latin America, where the vast majority of our sisters and brothers are struggling for survival, where they live in these shacks without running water, where they are not paid just wages for their labor, where they don't have schools for their children, and when their kids get sick, there's not a hospital to go to get those needed medicines. And so many of them dying before the age of 4 or 5. And it's out of this reality of struggle that will come their soldiers to our country, to an army base, Fort Benning, to a school, the School of the Americas, to learn combat skills. As people of goodwill, as people of faith, I believe that we're called to be peacemakers in our world, to try to be healers. Growing up in a small town in Louisiana, I must say we didn't talk much about peace as we gathered into our little faith community. We didn't confront that sin of racism. We didn't confront the sexism so alive there in our church and in the community. Words like exploitation and oppression were not part of our vocabulary. I went off to the State University to study geology, hoping to get rich in the oil fields of South America. And like many of you, worked very hard for that degree. Out of college years ago, Vietnam was in the making. Being a patriotic young man, I became a naval officer, wanted to serve my country. Spent 2 years aboard ship. Went to a NATO station in Europe and thought of making the military a career. And when they asked for volunteers to go off to Vietnam to fight communism, I didn't hesitate. I believed those at the Pentagon and went off to this country we knew so little about, Vietnam. And I can only say that for many of us, young men that we were, Vietnam was a turning point in our lives. The suffering there, the death changed us, the violence. Losing friends, being wounded when I was there, I was forced to look at my faith more seriously and to ask a basic question: what am I going to do if I get out of here? I do believe there's this mysterious sort of a divine grace at work in our lives, trying to call us to be more human, more compassionate. Near our base was this orphanage, 350 children being cared by a missionary and a small staff. I and some of my buddies would go there to do volunteer work, and as I would spend time with the children, all of them who had lost their parents in the war, many of them wounded by our napalm and bullets, I began to think about missionary work, about trying to be more of a peacemaker, a healer in our world. For the first time, I began to see violence as a dead-end street. But it was only the beginning of something stirring up in my life, not knowing where all of this was going to lead. I left Vietnam and decided now so grateful really to come back home, to be reunited with my family in Louisiana, my friends, and then entered a missionary group called the Maryknoll Order, based in New York, with some 28 missions in countries overseas, 28 countries overseas, trying to serve the poor. I entered a Catholic seminary, and then years later was ordained a priest, and then went off to Bolivia to serve the poor. A slum, well, first I had to struggle through language school, Spanish, in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and then went off to La Paz, the capital. And there, a small room in a slum, rent was $25 a month, and this became my home for the next 5 years. And it was here in this slum of Bolivia where the poorest of the poor lived. They became my teachers. Those I went to serve began to teach me. This gringo from Louisiana really started getting educated. They taught me, first of all, about my country's foreign policy. There we were supporting a brutal dictator in Bolivia, General Hugo Banzer, who had come into power through a violent coup. And the men with the guns, the bullies, they were everywhere, keeping the poor in their place. And there was the CIA very active there at the university where I started taking some classes to improve my Spanish and to make some contacts. And there, of course, were the large corporations, the multinational corporations, coming in, seeking profits, where there's big money to be made from the vast resources in Latin America and the developing world, and from that cheap labor force there. It was in the 16th century that the conquistadors arrived from Spain and Portugal, arriving in Latin America to enrich themselves off of the backs of the poor and to exploit those resources there. Today, the new conquistadors are the sweatshops, those representing the large corporations. They represent also those coming in from the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They're the new conquistadors. They are arriving there for the same reasons, to exploit, to enrich themselves. What I learned in Bolivia from the poor was something very, very basic and so important, especially as people of goodwill and people of faith coming to see this, that in every country there's enough resources for everyone. The indigenous of Bolivia, the Aymara, say this: Pachamama, the earth goddess, has given us so much, so many blessings in our country. There's enough for all to live comfortably. And how true it is, really. In every country, enough resources for everyone. And yet, so many in our world today, 60% of our population living on 6% of the resources, struggling for survival, marginated, living on the edge. And the poor know this very well, that the problem is greed. The problem is irresponsible stewardship of that creation, of those gifts, those resources, those many blessings in their country. How over time a small elite began to confiscate for themselves the land, the power now, and the wealth in their hands. And what has happened in Latin America, in the developing world, where a small elite now has the power and the wealth, could not possibly be done without the men with the guns. And this is where the U.S. Army School of the Americas comes in. They have provided over 60,000 soldiers in Latin America, the men with the guns, to protect that socioeconomic system that has kept the rich rich and the poor poor. In my 5th year, I must say I was very happy in Bolivia as we went about our health and educational programs, our community development programs, trying to improve the quality of life there in the neighborhood, trying to get a literacy program started, a health care clinic, a school for the kids. And one day, coming out of a meeting with some university students and some tin miners, they moved in, they arrested us, and I was forced out of the country, persona non grata. I tried to get back, could not get back, but I must say it was a very hard, sad time. I didn't know what to do. But friends here at home taught me something very important, that we don't have to go to Latin America to work for justice, to be in solidarity with the poor. There's so much to do here, where we are, where we have our feet. I began to travel. I was based in Chicago at our Maryknoll Center there, and started traveling to a lot of colleges, some church groups, peace groups, talking about what I had seen and heard in Bolivia, what I had learned, what I had been taught by those I went to serve. And then, not long after arriving, for many of us, our attention turned to El Salvador, small country in Central America, the size of Massachusetts, 5 million people, a country where government was at war with its people. 1980, Archbishop Oscar Romero gunned down in church for his defense of the poor. That same year, December the 2nd, 1980, 4 U.S. churchwomen, 3 nuns, and a Catholic lay worker working with the poor in El Salvador were raped and were killed by Salvadoran soldiers. When that happened, so many of us began to ask what was going on in this little country. Many of us went there, and we found what the women found, a microcosm of what's going on throughout Latin America. How that small elite, the oligarchy, the patrons, over time had taken most of the land for themselves, fertile land that they used to grow coffee beans. And they grew very wealthy and lived in their mansions with their servants and their shopping sprees to the U.S. But those who picked their coffee beans couldn't make it on $1 a day. And they suffered. And they saw their children die before their time. And they did what we would do if we were living under that situation, under those conditions. They said, basta, enough. We are human beings. We cannot endure this anymore. And they spoke out for just wages and for food for the table. And when they did speak out, there were the men with the guns to silence them, to disappear them, to kill them. And what angered me as a North American there in El Salvador was to see my country giving guns to those soldiers during the killing. That was wrong. That was a crime against humanity. I came back from El Salvador and I couldn't keep quiet. I joined so many people here at home trying to stop that military aid. And then when 525 soldiers came from El Salvador to Fort Benning, Georgia, to start training on U.S. soil in combat skills, that's when I decided to cancel a whole lot of talks in colleges and went to Fort Benning, there in this little town, Columbus, Georgia. I rented this small house, called it Casa Romero, and began to organize. A few friends joined me. We gave talks at Purdue, Columbus State University, and other groups, other colleges there. But after a few months of talking, we decided it was time to take the message to the Salvadoran soldiers on Fort Benning, those in the barracks, those learning how to kill. Linda Ventimiglia, who had joined our group, she was in the Army Reserves, had trained at Fort Benning. Larry Rosebaum, who had worked with the poor in Brazil, and myself, we went down the road to Ranger Joe's, and we bought Army uniforms. We dressed as high-ranking Army officers and went on to Fort Benning at night, carrying with us a very powerful boom box that contained the last sermon of Archbishop Oscar Romero that he gave in the cathedral the day before he was assassinated, where he made this special plea to the men in the military, saying to them, "Stop the killing, lay down your arms, cese la represión, stop the repression." And we wanted to have these soldiers in barracks now to hear the words of this martyr, this prophet, Oscar Romero, one more time. So Linda, Larry, and I, we entered Fort Benning, penetrated this high security area, got saluted. And I want to say we were scared. It was a shaky salute, I must say. Went near the barracks. And with tree climbers, we scaled this tall pine tree near the barracks. And about 30 feet up, we tied down the boom box. And we waited. And when the last lights went out, we said, "Bishop Romero, this is for you, brother." And his voice just boomed into the barracks. And those soldiers, some of them coming out being scared, looking into the sky, not being able to see us, hearing the voice of Bishop Romero. In Spanish, his voice saying, "Stop the killing, lay down your arms." It was a sacred moment. The instructors, MPs came out with their guns, their M16s. They were very upset with us. They had threatened to shoot us down. It was time to come down. Left the boom box up there, however, blasting away. They handcuffed us, punched us, kicked us around, brought in the FBI to question us. And then we went to the county jail, and then to trial before this very, very well-known segregationist judge, Judge Robert Elliott, who sent civil rights workers to prison, had an injunction against Martin Luther King in the civil rights days. And in the courtroom, he didn't want to hear it why we did what we did. Every time we talked about El Salvador, every time we talked about the church women, Bishop Romero, the poor, he would cut us off. Charged with criminal trespass and impersonating Army officers, we were sent to prison for 18 months. Linda went to a federal prison in Lexington, Kentucky. Larry to La Tuna, Texas, and they sent me to Sandstone, Minnesota. Prison was hard, lonely, but I want to say we learned something very important in those early days. They could send us to prison, but they could not silence us. The truth cannot be silenced. And we spoke from prison. And we had a lot of media interviews in prison to spread the word. And when we got out of prison, we went back to work, joining thousands of people in this country, trying to stop that military aid to El Salvador. But I have to say we couldn't do it. Our voices were not strong enough. The bloodshed continued, so did the military aid. It got up to $1 million a day, all from our tax money sent to El Salvador, and the bloodshed continued. November the 16th, 1989, another massacre there at the university in San Salvador. University run by the Jesuit order, a group of Catholic priests of the Jesuit order. They also run Georgetown, Boston College, Marquette University, Loyola, and other 28 colleges in this country. Just past midnight, these 6 Jesuit priests, most of them professors, well-known scholars, their co-worker, a young mother, and her 15-year-old daughter, Selena, dragged out of their rooms and killed by these Salvadoran soldiers. It made the front pages of newspapers all over the world. Washington was very upset. Many of our members of Congress were trained at Jesuit colleges in the U.S. They sent a congressional task force to El Salvador to investigate, headed by Representative Joseph Moakley, graduate of Boston College. And they returned from their investigation and reported that those responsible were trained at the U.S. Army School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was then I was living at our Maryknoll Education Center in Minneapolis, and I felt it was important to go back to Georgia, to Fort Benning, to investigate the School of the Americas. We knew so little about this school. And I went down, right outside of the main gate, found this little apartment, $175 a month. Soldier just had left. And right outside, I look out the window there, and the big sign from here to the hall in the back, big sign that says, "Welcome to Fort Benning." Fixed up the place, said this is going to be our SOA watch, School of the Americas watch. I called friends to join me. Kathy Kelly came from Chicago, former school teacher, doing a lot today on Iraq. Charlie Litke came, recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor in Vietnam. 2 Dominican priests came, one who had to leave El Salvador with a death threat. 2 Salvadorans joined us, and others. We began with a very serious water-only fast, camping out at the main gate of Fort Benning, calling attention to the school. Our bodies, I must say, grew very weak, not eating, sustaining ourselves on water. But our hope was strong. We ended our fast. Food never tasted so good. We got strong again and went to work. We had to now find out what this school was all about. And through the Freedom of Information Act and human rights reports coming out of Latin America, we began to piece together the history of the School of the Americas, a school well known in Latin America, but here at home, here in our country, hiding behind a wall of secrecy. Our job was to break down that wall. We learned that the School of the Americas began in Panama way back in 1946, a U.S. Army school that trained soldiers from Latin American combat. Many of these soldiers became their country's dictators, like General Manuel Noriega from Panama, doing 30 years in a federal prison in Miami for drug running. General Bonzer from Bolivia, not only a graduate, but in 1988 inducted into the school's Hall of Fame. Death squad leaders went through this school. In 1984, the school, because of growing unrest in Panama by college students and the workforce there, labor unions, the press, the school was forced out of Panama and settled at Fort Benning, Georgia, where today it's operating full force, training every year about 1,500 soldiers from Latin America. It's a combat school. This is not a Peace Corps operation. They have added a few years ago a couple of hours in human rights, but that's not because of the growing resistance to the school, but that's not what this school is about. We didn't realize how serious this school was until 1993, when the United Nations Truth Commission report on El Salvador was made public. We learned that those responsible for the death of Bishop Romero, of the 3 responsible for his death, 2 of them went through the school. In the case of the rape and murder of the 4 church women, of the 5 responsible, 3 of them graduates. El Mozote, this remote village in El Salvador, over 900 killed, including over 100 children. Of the 12 officers responsible, 10 of them graduates. 6 university students killed in Peru, those responsible graduates of this school. death squad leaders operating in Honduras, those responsible, the vast majority of them, the key players, graduates of the school. Let me say this, we knew from the beginning, if we got this information that we were gathering in our research about this School of the Americas and its graduates, to the general public, into colleges, into church groups, and to Congress, people would pay attention. We knew that. Because in our country, in every country, we have compassion. If we're aware that our foreign or domestic policy is causing all of this suffering, people will respond. And sure enough, 1993, the first national church group coming on board, the Presbyterian Church USA, with its 6 million members, passed a resolution to close the School of the Americas. And that had a big influence on other church bodies. Right after they passed their resolution in the Presbyterian Church, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, with some 80,000 nuns as members, came on board. And look out. Thousands of letters began to arrive in Washington. A national veterans group, Veterans for Peace, came on board. A lot of colleges started entering the struggle, speaking out on this issue. Amnesty International called for its closure, and I'm so happy to see Amnesty International had a table out here as you entered the hall. Check it out. They do good work, important work. Pax Christi, a national faith community, calling for its closure. The United Methodist Bishops, Church of the Brethren, the Mennonites, Unitarian Universalists, and other church groups coming on board. 150 U.S. Catholic bishops signing on to a resolution to close it. And then more recently, the NAACP and the AFL-CIO passing a resolution to close it. And then we started seeing in the media now articles. Here's something that appeared in 1996, front page of the Washington Post. U.S. instructed Latins on executions and torture. There's discovered at the School of the Americas there were these manuals that advocated torture. And that got the attention of many in Congress. And then Newsweek ran a 2-page spread, running a school for dictators, giving photographs, running photographs of some of the well-known death squad leaders and dictators who were graduates of the school. And then editorials began to appear in major newspapers around the country calling for its closure. The New York Times, School of the Dictators, the Boston Globe, School of the Assassins, right out of the heartland, the Des Moines Register, a school not needed. The Cleveland Plain Dealer, a school for closing. The Chicago Tribune, lights out at the School of the Americas. The Los Angeles Times buried this relic. In my state, where I live now, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution shut down the School of the Americas. And then in Washington, of course, every spring we would go to Washington to lobby our members of Congress to cut off the funding to this school. We learned that $20 million a year was being pumped into this school to train these thugs from Latin America, all coming from our pockets, the U.S. taxpayers. And every year at Congress, as they would vote to cut off the funding, the gap would close. The gap would close. And this past May, by a vote of 204 to 214, we came very close. But now the Pentagon has decided to change the name of the school, to change the name, as if we were going to go away. But we say, no way. New name, same shame. It's cosmetic. It's what we call window dressing. Like Representative Joe Moakley says, it's like taking perfume and pouring it on a toxic dump. It won't work. It's like taking a bottle of poison and just writing penicillin on it. It's still deadly. It won't work. And nobody's been fooled by that, happy to say. Every November, it's become a tradition in the movement. We gather at the main gate of Fort Benning in November to keep alive the memory of all of the victims of this school, to try and speak for them whose voices have been taken away. That first November 1990, as we gathered, we had 10 of us. And the next year, 200 came. The next year, 600. It was 3 years ago, 2,000 came. And 601 of us crossed the line. It's become a tradition as we gather. We have a memorial service on that Sunday. That Saturday, a lot of speakers and good musicians. They've painted a white line across the road, right in front of the sign that says, "Welcome to Fort Benning." And they say if we cross that white line, we're going to be arrested. We're breaking the law. And we say as we gather there, what law are you talking about? There's a higher law, a law that says thou shalt not kill, a law that says we are to be peacemakers, that we are to be healers in our world, that we are to walk in solidarity with our sisters and brothers of Latin America and speak for them. And today, that's the law we're going to follow. And 601 of us crossed that white line in a solemn funeral procession, carrying coffins and white crosses bearing the names of the victims, some with the Star of David, photographs of the victims. And over the microphone, their names called. Sister Ida Ford, and everyone in unison, presente. She is present with us. Bishop Oscar Romero, presente. He is present with us. And down the road, they stop us, and they arrest us, and they bring us to the MP station to process us and learn that 25 of us are repeat offenders. We crossed the line the year before. And so we brought back to trial before Judge Elliott, who's now become known as Maximum Bob. Packed courtroom, Representative Joseph Kennedy, CNN is there, our parents, friends. 25 of us in our group. Sister Rita Steinhagen, a 70-year-old nun from Minneapolis. College students, retired professors, veterans. And there we are before Judge Elliott, knowing where we're going. And we spoke from the heart, saying why we crossed that line. And then he gave us each 6 months in prison, the maximum, and a $3,000 fine. And we were sent to federal prisons all over this country. I was sent to a prison in South Carolina, a little town, big prison. Everybody works in prison. But I must say, when I arrived at this prison, I was angry. I was upset. That we were going to prison for such a nonviolent protest for 6 months. When those who did the killing and who raped and who tortured, they will not serve 1 day in prison. Because in their countries, they have the power. That's the way it works in Latin America. The men with the guns don't do the time. They do the crime, but not the time. And they give to themselves amnesty, amnestia total. And you cannot touch these bullies. You can't touch them because they've got the power. And I was angry. And I just said to the warden, I'm not working until those who did the killing start doing their time. Well, in prison, there's not a whole lot of dialogue about this, and I was sent to the hole, to solitary confinement. Like you, I like solitude and quiet time, but in this 6x9 cell, it got heavy, as the weeks passed, and the dark night of the soul set in. You start questioning, you cut off from your friends and loved ones and your support community. And a big question that kept surfacing, we've all asked it, how effective are we? How effective were we in all of what we were doing? Crossing the line, going to prison. I had been there before, as others have. What does all of this mean? Are we making any change here? How effective is this? And I must say I was moving into despair. We've all been there. We've all been there. And the joy in our lives somehow escapes us. It's no longer there. And it's the dark night. You're alone. But something happened, and it came from the words of this wonderful woman, Dorothy Day, who started all of these houses of hospitality and soup kitchens for the poor, who spent her life serving the poor. And she said this so often in her writings. She said, let us not, as we work for peace and justice, let's not worry about being effective, do the best we can. But let's concentrate on being faithful. And I tell you, I latched on to Dorothy's words because it was the truth. This is what it's about. Being faithful to what we know in our hearts to be the truth. We know that what we're doing is about peace and about justice and about healing. It's about the poor. It's about trying to be responsible citizens, trying to use our energy, our limited gifts, as best we can to relieve some of the suffering around us. It's being faithful to what we have in our hearts and our conscience. And I tell you, I felt free. I felt free. And got through that experience in good shape. Strong, as each of us did. And we all got out of prison in September, just in time to start organizing for November. And we didn't know. Their intention was to kill our movement, was to, with these harsh sentences, to scare people from coming back to Georgia and gather in front of the main gate. But it was not to be. No. Oh, incredible. They started arriving in vans, buses from colleges all over the country. A couple college students arrived on their bicycles from Maine. We had so many. We noticed a big growth in college students coming on board there at front of Fort Benning. A lot of veterans. A lot of parents with their children, some of their infants in strollers. We had a real cross-section of people, young and old, from all kinds of different faith traditions. A real diverse movement here, as it should be. And it was a celebration of hope. 7,000 people gathered. And then over 2,000 crossed the line. So many, they couldn't arrest them. They just put them on buses and hauled them off. And then this past November, 12,000 gathered there. 12,000 from all over the country. Colleges from the East Coast to the West Coast. Veterans, senior citizens, parents with their kids. And we all spoke as one voice. And over 4,000 crossed the line, but last November they couldn't take it. They couldn't take it. They had to arrest some of us. It was embarrassing. So they arrested 63, the leaders in the procession, carrying the coffins and the crosses. And since they didn't have the facilities to send all 63 to jail, they went after 9. And today, 9 of our people are in prison. 4 women and 5 women and 4 men. Judy Bierbaum from Albuquerque, Margaret Kanapke from Dayton, Ohio, Charlie Litke, the recipient of the Medal of Honor from Vietnam, at a prison in Lompoc, California. And each of them, like those before them, they're speaking from prison. They're energized in the movement. And tonight, as I speak, I wanted to remember them. I wanted to remember them because they are in prison tonight for their beliefs. Let me just say this. The movement continues. We've got work ahead of us. The struggle continues. We're not going away until this school of assassins is shut down. And I'm here at your university to invite you to be a part of our struggle. We need your voices. We need your energy, your hope. I hope that you're learning a little about this issue. It's not very complicated. It's very simple, really. It's about men with guns. It's about violence. It's about our foreign policy in Latin America that has to be changed. And closing this School of the Americas will help bring about democracy and healing in Latin America. And for that to happen, we need you. We need your help. Archbishop Oscar Romero, before he was assassinated, said, "Let those who have a voice speak for the voiceless." You and I, we have a voice. And on this issue and all these other issues of peace and justice, may we speak clearly and boldly. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open up the floor for questions for a few minutes.
For those who are leaving, I ask you to just stop at the table in the back of the auditorium. There's some important literature there. There's a flyer you should take, sign up for the mailing list, some videos that are available, and very important, this blue slip to really join the movement. Marcus, where's Marcus? Please stand. Marcus is the statewide coordinator for the SOA Watch. We'll be giving some nonviolent training as you prepare to go down in November, organizing vans or a bus from Kansas. And we ask you to please take this and meet Marcus in the back after the lecture to talk more with him about how we here could coordinate going down in November. Comments and questions, please.
What is the name of the SOA?
Yes. It's one of those 50-cent words there, big name, big time. The new name is the Western Hemisphere Institute for Professional and Educational Training. Acronym WIPIT. We're going to have fun with this one. This name, they say, will be made official later this year. They're going to, I think, also try and change the stationery there, but they haven't done that yet. But we hear they're getting ready for it. Please.
What is the justification that they give for keeping the school open?
This is a key question, very important question. What is the justification for their keeping the school going? During the Cold War, when we in the Soviet Union were enemies, we were going at it, they said it was very important to fight the communist threat in Latin America, that the school was important to stop the spread of communism. With the Cold War behind us, they're given two reasons. And actually, I just, not long ago, a few months back, debated at Dickinson College in Pennsylvania, the commandant of the School of the Americas, Colonel Widener, West Point graduate, very articulate, who believes in the school. He and they, the Pentagon, they're saying two things why the school is important today. First, it's important to fight the drug war. $1.3 billion has recently been allocated, approved for Colombia. President Clinton was there just a couple weeks ago. It's a serious problem in Colombia. I can only say that we believe that this is not the way to fight it. At the School of the Americas, there's a drug interdiction course that only 10% of those soldiers are enrolled in. And we say, if it's such a priority, why aren't they training in counter-narcotics? This is brought to our attention by Representative Joseph Moakley. And it was my experience, and also the experience of Major Joseph Blair, who's joined our side, a former instructor at the school, just retired from the Army after 20 years, who's saying that it is common knowledge in Latin America that many of those involved in the drug running, the money laundering, are in fact, especially in the higher ranks of the military. But what they're really, the second reason that they're really pushing hard on for the justification of the school is now they're saying it's important to teach the soldiers democracy. And we say, this ain't the way. You don't teach democracy through the barrel of a gun. They say they're teaching the soldiers to be subordinate to civilians because they know in their countries they've been in power for so long, they run their countries. Even today in Guatemala with the civilian president, the power is still in the hands of the military. And we ask, how are you going to teach these soldiers to be subordinate to civilians at Fort Benning, Georgia? How are you going to teach them democracy through the barrel of a gun? And what we're saying is simple. If you want to teach democracy, close down the School of the Americas and send those soldiers to U.S. universities, some of the fine universities. Bring some here to your campus. Unarmed, of course. And this is where, really, you know what I would propose? Serious. I'm serious. And I'm thinking about this more, really. If we had, for example, your university, I'm going to be in California next week, and then like Loyola in Chicago after, and I was just at the University of Pittsburgh, but it's just coming to me now. If your university could offer scholarships to the soldiers, not the whole gang, not 1,500 of them, but let's say 5, or even a couple, your university, I must say, would make some good, would be in the news. It would be, it would say something very important. It would disarm this school. We think it could close the school. Your university take some soldiers here, another university give a few scholarships, where they learn skills as you are learning here, skills that are going to contribute to our world and our society, skills that can help them heal the suffering of their people, where they could learn how to be teachers, agronomists. They could learn again of those skills that will help their people. Think about it. Talk with your president, the faculty. No, really, anything's possible with, if we think. Yes, please.
What kind of people in terms of demographics are the ones who join the Latin American armies?
Yes, another important question. Who are those who join the Latin America military? Who are the soldiers? Who are the men with the guns? There are two. I noticed it when I was in El Salvador and especially in Bolivia during those years and traveling through Peru and Brazil, Colombia. There's somewhat of a pattern. In each country, there are sort of two groups. Those families who have a long history of their family members, and the men especially being in the military. They're the officers, sort of the well-connected families, the wealthier families who live in the nice homes. And they come to the School of the Americas, many of them. They're handpicked. They're the future leaders as officers of their militaries. The others would be the enlisted men. They often come from the campo, the countryside. Their families are very humble. They're often campesinos. They work in the fields. And I have to say, and this is what hurts, often it's their way out of the poverty in a way. You know, they come from such poverty and struggle. The military is in a sense a ticket out of the campo. It's a way out of all of this. It's a step up in a way. And out of the ranks of the enlisted will come leaders, and they're handpicked, and they're brought to the school. And we say this, you know, because I've met a couple of the soldiers. I was really surprised how young they were the night we blasted the message of Bishop Romero. They're young. And it reminds me of when those days, years ago, as a young man, I mean, I thought of making the military a career. Went through Officer Candidate School in Newport, where the instructors, you know, are very powerful people. There at Fort Benning, 25,000 U.S. Army personnel, similar to your Fort Riley here. Young men, a lot of enlisted men coming in to the Army from around the country. Many of them not going to college for different reasons. They're coming into the Army for a couple of years, you know. They want to save some money, maybe look at college later, and how those drill instructors, there's a lot of machismo there. And I can only say, we don't see the men there as, you know, el enemigo, our enemy. We are trying to transform, we are trying to change our foreign policy in Latin America, and we feel this school should not continue to operate. And these soldiers are welcome, but not with their guns, not with their guns. Please.
I sympathize also with you with all the killings that happened in South America. What frustrates me, though, listening to you, and all due respect to you, you were prior military. You stood for the oath that I took to protect this country, the United States. You were also taught how to kill and how to do whatever you had to do as an officer. So that's exactly what they're doing over there, is protecting their country. We have a problem here in this country. There's a big separation between the rich and the poor. We have killings also here, but probably in a different degree. So I don't see where you're coming from unless you are hiding underneath the cloth to really show the effects to the young communities we have in the United States, what your motive is to close that school that I am for it to stay open.
I'm sorry?
I would like to add on to that. I personally,
But I say that because I am a retired career military soldier.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank
I have
you.
personally been where you have been,
Okay.
in some of those areas. I also have worked in the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
And present half of the case or 60% extremely well. But there are other issues and situations that are in addition to this. I have been where he's talking about. I have been in the Pentagon, and there were other reasons for some things going on there besides what has been present tonight. So what am I saying? Good presentation, but there's more to this story, and I encourage you to research it out.
In fact, let me just say, I encourage you to check out the two websites. There's their website, www.soa.org, and there's ours, www.soaw.org. Let me just say about my motive a bit. All I can say is I hope that each of you, each of us, will go through life learning from our experiences. I've come to believe that we are not born peacemakers. We are a product of our parents, most of them very loving, hard-working parents. I'm a product of the rural South, patriotic as they can be, hard-working, a working-class family. Again, when I was in high school and college, I never once questioned what I was hearing, whether it was from a professor, from the Pentagon. I had the attitude that my leaders in Washington knew best, that those at the Pentagon, when I was in the military, I believed them. And when they said, we have to go off to this country, Vietnam, I knew nothing about, I said, yes, let's go get those communists. And all I can say is the experience there was very personal, as each of our experiences are very personal. There are some of my buddies who came back believing that what they did was right. They went over as a hawk and they came back as a hawk. I went over as a hawk and I came back as a hawk with some dove feathers perhaps sprouting. There was something going on in my life. It's called transformation. It's called growing in one's awareness and sensitivity perhaps to suffering. It's not overnight. We know that change takes a long time, and it's hopefully it will be forever. And I can only say, I hope that you and I can continue to learn from our experiences, to grow from that, and to question, especially when it comes to our foreign policies and domestic policies. A basic question that I never asked: who are the beneficiaries here? Who are the victims? Who's really benefiting from this? Is this just? Is this helping my sisters and brothers in this country? And I look at our foreign policy in Latin America, and I have to say this: we have been on the wrong side historically. We have been on the side of the dictators. We have been on the side of the oligarchies, the large corporations like United Fruit that began in Panama in 1954. And today, and I'm happy to say that there are thousands of college students entering this issue of the sweatshops. There in El Salvador, some 45 sweatshops. Most of the workers there are young women being paid starvation wages. And students are learning that these products that they're making are being sold in campus bookstores. And who's getting the profits? Nike, Liz Claiborne, Walmart, all these corporations operating their sweatshops. And the job for you and I is to look at these issues with critical eyes. When we look at this item we buy in our bookstore, a basic question: who made this? I was at Georgetown University recently talking there. The students are fired up. They discovered in their bookstore all these items enriching their university, however, and the corporations on the backs of the poor. And they wanted to see the contract that their university had for those items in the bookstore, the clothing items. And the president said no. And they said, we're going to occupy the office. And there was a little sit-in, and the Washington Post was there, and the New York Times, and then after they were ready to dialogue. And then all of a sudden, after some time now, they have faculty and students working together, going to El Salvador, working on what they call a just contract, ensuring that those making the items for their university are paid just wages. And this is what it's about: basic questions. It's about justice. It's about trying to connect ourselves, our lives, with other people.
I'm wondering how you feel the WTO is related to this
Yes.
situation, because you're mentioning the exploitation of land.
Yes.
The idea of selling in large amounts, not to the country, but out of the country. And I've read a lot on sustainable agriculture and supporting local communities.
Yeah.
I'm saying they aren't doing that.
Let me just say very, very briefly, it's called about the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the financial, shall we say, the economic giants. It's called structural adjustment. It's a way, and I have this because it explains it so well, it's right out of a video that we're working on. It's a way the World Bank and the IMF force poor countries to repay loans by cutting back on human services like schools and health care and raising the price of basic needs. Just a few months ago in Bolivia, they said to those in Bolivia, to the poor, to the government, IMF, World Bank, there actually through the corporations, that in order to pay your loan, you've got to raise prices in the basic needs. What did they raise? The water bill. And 30% of their salary was going to pay their water bill. And they protested. They protested in La Paz and Cochabamba, and there were some killed. And we learned that a couple of those soldiers who actually did the killing were SOA graduates. And this is where the SOA comes into the picture. They provide the muscle. They are the enforcers of the policies of the sweatshops, the IMF and the World Bank. In El Salvador, the young women working at these sweatshops, if they begin to organize, they're fired. If they speak out, they're fired. If they start protesting, the men with the guns are called in. Who are they? Not all, but many of them trained at the School of the Americas. They are the enforcers. And that's why I'm happy to say in Seattle and Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia, so many students, especially the students today, are really, really researching and becoming very, very involved in the sweatshop issue, the IMF and the World Bank issue. Perhaps one more, please. Yes.
One student asked why to get the School of the Americas. I want to add, as a Latin American sociologist, why do we need a military in Latin America? Are we going to defend the military? Or war is over, there is no need for the military. That seems to be the question right now. And the nation in Latin America that advanced the most is in Central America, is Costa Rica, which abolished the army in 1948. So right now, the big issue in Latin America is to get rid of the military. And there is what we would need to help, to put pressure to abolish in Latin America compulsory military service in our country.
Let me just say this, and then we'll close. This is, I'm looking for this quote from Eisenhower, but really this is at the very core of this issue. I began the lecture by saying the starting point is the reality of Latin America, where in Brazil, Bolivia, Honduras, in Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, the vast majority of the people in each of these countries are struggling for survival. If they get sick tonight, they don't have access to health care. They're not bringing their kid. If their kid just runs high fever, starts, it looks like the child's going to die. There's not a hospital they can bring that kid to. Tonight, if I get sick, I have access to that. I'm going to call 911. And I'll be taken to one of the fine hospitals here and get the needed medicines and probably be cured. But this in Latin America is the reality, and we're asking a basic question. How is this school and the training there going to benefit, improve the quality of life for people? And that's why so many people I'm finding are connecting to this issue. It's about compassion. It's about justice at its very core. We know in the year 2000 that we should not have millions of our people dying from starvation, not having adequate housing, not having sewage facilities, running water in their homes, not having schools. It doesn't make sense. And what you say, I can only affirm. We're asking that. Why in Latin America? Why we are asking also in our country, we've got billions and billions going into the Pentagon. And calling, and I hear some of the politicians, it's not enough. It's never enough for these guys at the Pentagon. General Eisenhower said this, former president, a general that was so loved. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. Says it all. Let me just say in closing too, I invite you to get more information. In the back, we've got some good one-page handouts. We've got some excellent videos. This video, School of Assassins, narrated by Susan Sarandon, Oscar-nominated, inexpensive. This one, Crossing the Line, about all the thousands who crossed the line here. These two are excellent resources to share with your family members, your friends, co-workers. They also make great birthday gifts. And these two yellow flyers, be sure and take them. Marcus put a lot of work on those. And also meet Marcus in the back by the table. He'll tell you more about this blue. Be sure to sign up for the S-Way Watch mailing list. We're getting ready to send out another mailing. And also to sign up for this, if you are interested in getting in touch with Marcus and being part of a delegation or a group that will be going down in November the 18th and 19th. We're going to have the biggest gathering ever. And there'll be college students from all over the country, and I hope you could be there with us. It's going to be a celebration of hope. We're going to be there speaking as one. And lastly, let me just say this. We're not going away. We need your voices. If you can't go down in November, do something here at the university. It's called an action, a solidarity action. Show a video, have a speaker. Something, again, to connect with the thousands in Georgia in November. And lastly, I want to thank you again for being here, for all of those fine sponsoring groups, for the faculty and students who brought all of this together, really, for your presence here tonight. Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the Buddhist leaders, a spiritual leader, says it so well, that we cannot bring peace into our world unless there's peace right here. And how true it is, how simple of a message, that we've got to bring peace right here before we bring it out there. And I want to say our movement is rooted in nonviolence. For me, it's the only way, inspired by Martin Luther King, by Gandhi, Cesar Chavez, Dorothy Day, and others. This movement is about nonviolence. It's also about joy. What's bringing a lot of people into this movement is the joy that they feel. When we come together and work for peace, trying to relieve the suffering in our world, something happens to us. We find a lot of meaning. I tell you, it beats hanging out at the mall. It brings joy to our lives. No, really, it does something to us. And as we go through this journey that we're all on, I hope that each of you will experience that joy, will experience that peace. Thank you very much.